Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today, I have the pleasure of Tracy Aust on the show. Good afternoon to you, Tracy.
Afternoon, Julian.
Yeah, good to see you. I'm glad to have you on. You are the principal at West Thames College. You appointed that in 2016. And your job, it sounds like a small thing, but actually it's not. It's a huge thing. It's to oversee the management of the college and to ensure all your students are successful. And you've got a real passion about that, I know. And today we will be exploring decision-making rooted in principles and values in leadership. But before we go there, Tracy, what do you love about what you do?
I think the thing I love most is working with the staff and the students that we have here at the college and actually feeling like collectively we're able to make a difference. And, for some of the young people that we work with, it can transform their lives. We give them opportunities and chances that they just haven't seen to date. And knowing that we care makes such a massive difference. And I remember when I first came to the college, not even in the role as principal, but when I first came to the college, people said to me, once you get here, you'll stay. And at the time I was like, oh, don't be ridiculous. I'll do my 3 years and I'll be off and move on to the next thing. And actually over 20 years later, here I am.
Wow, 20 years, that's a long time. And I'm sure you've seen many changes in that time as well, and challenges, and also the challenges we've had in the last few years. Where's that passion come from with this whole thing about this desire to, help students be successful and just what you've just said there? Where's that come from?
I think I always considered teaching, and I think that probably stems back from my own school experience of having a couple of significant teachers, both at primary level and at secondary level, who actually had a real impact on me. And I just thought, that's something I can see where that adds value. That's something I'm interested in. And when I first went to university, I was studying to be a primary school teacher and very rapidly realised that that really wasn't for me, children of that age. So I switched my degree to economics and politics and absolutely loved it. And at the end of that process, I then did a PGCE for secondary schools, secondary school age. And as soon as I was on teaching practice, obviously you have the nerves, you've got someone in there observing you. But honestly, it was the first time someone came in and it just felt so right. It was kind of almost a relief just to think, wow, I found the thing that I really want to do. And honestly, I haven't looked back. I think there was a period when I was at school, and I must have been about 15, where I thought that I might like to be an accountant because I really like working with numbers and finance. I did a little stint on work experience and suddenly realised absolutely not for me. However, I did manage to take some of that and incorporate it into my early career, because when I first came to West Thames, one of the things I was doing is I was teaching A-level economics, A-level accounts, A-level business. So I've still been able to use the kind of finance piece in my role, but in various guises over the years.
And I'm sure in your role as principal, you're looking at a lot of numbers on a weekly basis to make sure that you're on track. We're talking about decision making today, and I'd like to get an understanding, because you're making decisions all the time, and they're significant decisions that impact you, impact your team, impact the college, the students, and I just want to understand you talk about the sort of values and principles behind sort of decision making. What are your values and principles? What before we get into the actual decision making process, what's behind all that for you? What are you rooted in?
So for me, it's about integrity. It's about honesty. It's about respect, being kind of open with people, and valuing other people's opinions. And I think as a college, when we were working on our values and principles, seeing those things come through that resonated with me as a person actually just felt very right. And I think as part of that, It's also about striving for excellence in everything you do and helping others, particularly our students, to know that actually you can smash those targets that, at school you may have been told it's impossible to reach. So there are kind of a core set of values that I guess I hold really dear to myself as a person, but being able to then reflect that in the job that I do as well is really important, because it means that when it comes to decision making, for example, it has to be authentic. I have to walk away with a clear conscience that actually, I've done the right thing, we've acted in the right way, and, we've respected people in that, whether it's our students, whether it's our staff.
And a lot of organizations put their values out, and I know your values of an organization is integrity, excellence, equality, and respect, which is obviously similar to your own personal ones. I don't know whether you might have had a hand in that, but certainly there's an alignment there. And in some ways, and I do a lot of work with organizations to help them get clarity on those values, or make them what's implicit, explicit. And it's a great process to do. And almost I always say to these organizations, these leaders, that's almost the easy bit, is getting to the point of knowing your values. The hard bit is living them and making them very obvious to those around you, because it's easy to put them on a wall, it's easy to put them on a website. So I'd love to understand, you can just pick whatever value you've got from your organization. How do you make sure that is lived within the organization from your perspective, but also from your staff?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do at the beginning of the year, we have a corporate induction with all new staff. And my intro to that corporate induction is always about the values and principles, because they are so embedded in everything we do. And I think it's really important from the outset that there is a clear understanding of what you're buying into if you come to be part of the organisation. And we also share them with students. And one of the things that I always say is, most organisations will have a set of values and principles, but these are much more than a set of words on paper, and actually they translate into behaviours. And then I talk through all the different ways in which that happens. So to give you an example, when we first set our values and principles, and it was a number of years ago now, and we kind of, we review them on an annual basis, but it was a complete whole college approach. We had an external organisation working with us who understood the college, and we had staff, students, everyone was involved in the process. And one of the things we really wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that they weren't just a set of words, but actually that they did translate into how we all operate and behave, and also something that we are all held accountable to and for. So we produced our principles, and those principles come with a set of, well, what does that mean? What does that look like in practice? So if we're saying, one of our principles is around being open and informative, well, how does that translate into a behaviour? So we shared examples of those, and then what we do is our values and principles are everywhere, starting from, the application process. If a member of staff wants to join us, it's there in their JD. In our annual appraisal programme, it has been designed to incorporate our values and principles. So every member of staff will be asked, how they think they're doing. How does that translate to values and principles? How is that reflected in what you do, and on a kind of a day-to-day basis? So it's it's so well embedded within the organisation, but we do ensure that we continue to go back to them to make sure that actually they're still as valid today as they were when we first developed them. And it's that constant check back. And we will say, I will say to staff as part of the new corporate induction, if you think these aren't being adhered to, you absolutely have a right. And staff do challenge us. And when we're making decisions, if there is, if something's happened, we will often say, well, actually, how is that being carried out? Have we acted in accordance with our values and principles? And if it's the case, that we haven't, then we absolutely will hold our hands up, we'll do something about it. But staff will question us, will challenge us, and that's what we expect them to do. And I think the other thing that's really important as part of that is actually role modeling them. We absolutely have a responsibility. It's no good saying I live and breathe it if actually no one sees the evidence of that. I absolutely do. And we talk about them a lot, and we make reference to them a lot. And as I say, they're kind of embedded in our processes, in our systems, but also in the conversations that we are having with people, with staff, and with students. And what's always quite reassuring is when you have externals coming in to visit us, they often talk about the feel of the place. And sometimes that's something that's kind of intangible, but actually when you get that feedback, it's always, we know what you mean. We work really hard at that. That's about the culture we've created. And it's really important that we have created a culture that allows those values and principles to be felt.
Yeah, and I think by almost putting down on paper what those values look like in behaviors and how people can observe it really makes it a lot more tangible and livable. I guess that's important, because obviously people see the word integrity, people know what it means, but how does that play out is really important. And I like the idea that you embed it in the sort of professional development in terms of your review each year. It's all embedded in values, but also, as you said, which I think often organizations forget about, role modeling is one of the most powerful tools to do anything in your organizations, because if you're saying one thing and doing another, people might not always say it, but they'll just feel this incongruence with you, thinking it doesn't align, something's not quite right here. So it's the most powerful way to take people on a journey of transforming cultures is by the role modeling and observing that. So taking those sort of values that you've got, and it's obviously clearly embedded and clearly, and I'm sure you're always continually checking and making sure that's all as it should be. How does that work in a context of decision making? I mean, have you got any examples where you use those, or I don't know, that could be helpful to sort of hear how your process of decision making works in this context?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you, I guess, a couple of different examples. One that's probably at the organisational level, and another one in terms of how it works at a kind of in a group level as a senior leadership team. And so certainly from an organisational point of view, unfortunately, it becomes an annual occurrence in the sector that you're looking at budgets and you're looking at, what's coming in, what changes do you need to make, how do you adapt? And we are a very flexible and agile sector. And so, more often than not, we will have a budget setting paper that we produce each year. We will always try and avoid in that paper there being any redundancies, but, quite often there will be reorganisation, restructures. And one of the things we always make sure that we do up front is make it very clear that completely aligns with our values and principles, why we are doing this, what the process is, how we engage with staff through the process, what the feedback is. And also, I think it's really important when you come to the end of a process like that to be really open and share the feedback you've received, share what changes you've made as a result of that. And I think it's a really helpful framework, because people see that actually whatever those tough decisions are that may need to be made, that you continue to act in a way that absolutely aligns with what we are trying to do as an organisation. It aligns to our values and principles. So I think at an organisational level, that would be an example. And then I think the second thing, kind of in decision making, we're all very clear that, in my case, no woman is an island, and actually that working together collectively is really important. And to be honest, most decisions that are made will involve more than just one person. And so we've created a structure that allows that to happen. So we've got a relatively small executive team. There are 4 of us. And one of the things that we created to support our decision-making process is we created a set of groups which we call our ET Plus groups. And we have those ET plus groups that kind of cover key functions of the business, so funding and finance, student voice. And in those groups, as well as members of the executive team being present, it actually incorporates members from across the organisation that have a stake in the decisions that are made by that group. And those groups have become really powerful in terms of decision making because, one, people know that they have a voice, people know what the mechanism is for their voice being heard, and actually with those groups, in the same way as others, we will be very clear up front about what the purpose of the groups are and how those groups are going to operate, again aligned to our values and principles. So we will share information that comes out of those groups. And again, that ties back to, I guess, to our approach, the open and informative, being equal and inclusive. So I think in everything we do, we try to ensure that actually we are embedding the values and principles. And sometimes we really have to think about it because it's just almost become second nature. It's what you do, it's how you work, that sometimes you have to take a step back and think about, oh gosh, yeah, that is an example of A, B, and C, because it's so embedded.
Yeah, and I think having those sort of mini groups that allows that sort of hopefully different type of thinking and input into the exec team is a way of keeping that almost that balanced view on the organization. How do you, which is often sometimes the case with groups, guard against that whole sense of group think or committee mindset where you, I don't know, perhaps the senior person in that group says something and then everybody just follows because they think they've made the right decision rather than challenging? How do you guard against that? Because it's difficult, because I've been in groups where I might have been the senior person, I've said something and everybody's then just agreed with me, and you're thinking that's not really creating a group decision making here. How do you guard against that?
I think one of the things that we do is think very carefully about the membership of the group, because you know that you want a selection of people on that group. And if you kind of go back to business theory about, take something like Belden's roles, and you have the different people on your group. And certainly as an executive team, we absolutely recognise that you need that mix and balance. And so for each of us in the team, we will have our own strengths and areas for improvement. But actually knowing that that challenge is really as important as the support. So we look very closely at the membership, and also it's people from across the organisations at various levels, and also they involve our students. So where it's relevant, there will be student reps on those groups too. And I think all of us, anyone who's leading one of those executive team groups, understands the value and the importance, and actually have seen where they've worked well. And working well doesn't mean everyone is in agreement. Working well means there is a healthy discussion and challenge, and different ways of thinking that enrich the decisions that are made. And I think for us as an organisation, we are hugely diverse, which reflects our student body. And again, that diversity and that kind of celebration of differences and listening to others' opinions is really important. And I think that's what we put into the structure of the groups that we've formed. And each year, the membership of those groups is renewed.
That's good. I like that. And it's important to keep that diversity and that flow of different, I guess, opinions, and like the idea that you can have healthy debates. I remember I talked to one CEO. What he would do, he wouldn't make a decision. He wouldn't share his thoughts until everybody else has shared their thoughts, because he knew he had a quite persuasive nature and quite an influence, and so he would almost hold back on what he thought about something, allowed everybody, and then he would use that as an opportunity to then either potentially change his mind and before he shared his thoughts, which created that thing. What we're touching on here, I guess, which is where people can challenge, which is healthy, as you say, in a respectful way, is like psychological safety, isn't it? Almost getting teams, environments where people feel they can say, "Oh, Tracy, I don't agree with that in obviously in a respectful way. How have you created that? Because it sounds like you have created that sort of sense of people are able to challenge and really push the boundaries, even with those in authority.
I think it's about the culture of being very open, and even down to some very simple things where I have an open door policy, and genuinely my open door policy means that anyone can come in. The door's open, come in, ask me what you've got to ask me. It can be students, it can be staff. So I think people genuinely see that, and I think one of the things, or one of the ways in which we've created it, is about being very accessible and visible. And sometimes I will go to other organizations, and the CEO, you can't find them, their staff don't know them. And we've had lots of positive feedback when people have joined us to say, I can't believe we can just come and walk in your office and ask you something. And I'm, yeah, of course, that is genuinely how we are. And that doesn't just happen overnight. That is about establishing that, that culture of this is how it works. But I think you have to do it through a number of different ways, through the actions that you demonstrate. And I think one of the things that, for me, that's the most powerful, is when we have our students, and our students will come and, give feedback, or we're working with them on a particular project. And actually, they see the impact of their contributions on decisions that have been made. And, I always say when I meet with the new students at the start of the year, the student voice for me is one of the most rewarding, but B, the most important part of what I do, because, as an organisation and as a group of staff, we may be creating an environment which we think, is all singing and dancing and does everything it needs to be. But actually, what do the students think? And one of the things that I always say to the students at the beginning is, look, if you've got ideas about how things should work, share them. And sometimes you might have a wish list, but actually, if you come to us with that wish list, if there are things we can't do, we'll say we can't do them, we'll let you know why, and we look at alternatives. So I do think that culture of being kind of open and honest with things, but being open to collaboration, being creative. And I think we've managed to do that both inside the organisation. But I think one of the things for me as a leader that I'm, I guess, quite pleased with, is being able to take some of that and to extend it beyond the organisation, in my role as CEO, working with external partners, working across the sub-region. And that's been, a real success. And had someone said to me when I first became CEO, that's what I was going to be doing, I would have probably said, it's not really where I want to go.
And it goes back to role modeling again, isn't it? You've got this way of being open, accessible. We talk about open door, but it's a mindset. It's you probably walk around the college a lot more. You're just more open to have conversations. You'll stop with it's role modeling, and people, and then that pervades a culture and starts to see these values again, and this person's making a difference and an impact. And I'm sure you obviously made hundreds and thousands of decisions as your time at in your role. Talk me through. It might be an example where you've made I would say a bad decision. You made a decision and it turned out a bad decision. How did you navigate that difficult situation? Because we all make decisions based on what we know, and then something happens and it turns out it wasn't a great decision. And just wondered how you take your team through those situations when things don't go quite as you expect.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I will always do, and I think my team do as well, is reflect on decisions that have been made, good and bad, because actually there is always some learning to come out of it. And more often than not, the best learning comes from where you've made the wrong decision, or made mistakes, or could have done things differently. And I think that whole reflective piece is really important. And so, sometimes it might not be a major decision, but actually just something that we have, a decision that we've made, that on reflection we've said, actually, we should, that probably wasn't the right call, or the timing of that decision wasn't right. And the way we would unpick that would be initially through our ET group, so with the team, and look at actually what could we have done differently. Was there anything about that we should have considered in a different way? And if we're in that situation again, how would we stop ourselves from making the same decision? So I think that reflective practice piece is really important, and I think it's important both at an individual level, and that's definitely something that I will do. And even when perhaps a decision is not necessarily the wrong decision, but actually, for me, it always goes back to the piece around excellence. If I'm going to do something, I want to give it 100%. I want to do the best job I can do. And I will often come away from something thinking, well, yeah, that was 95% of that was good, but that 5%, what else could I have done? What could I do differently next time? And I think, that's something that I will do as a person, my team will do. And one of the things that we've done as an organisation is we've created a programme for leaders and managers, and it's called our Creative Excellence Programme. And the Creative Excellence Programme has been designed around our values and principles. So everyone, in the organisation that goes into a management position, it's one of the first things that they do. So for me, it goes back to that values and principles piece again, and it's part of what we do. And just last year, one of the things that we've been looking at is we look at leaders and we look at managers, and I'm really keen that leaders aren't just managers. We have leaders across the organisation. So how do we develop our leaders across the organisation? Perhaps that individual teacher who is the specialist in the subject, who's actually doing something creative. How do you harness that and develop that? So I think it is about that reflection. It is about learning from what you have done. But also, one of the things that I'm absolutely adamant is that we don't ever use a blame culture. It's never about that. It's always about, okay, what could we have done differently? And even if sometimes members of my team will come to me and say, I've done this, I'm not sure I've made the right call. We will have that discussion about, so what could you have done differently in that situation? What might have brought a better outcome?
Yeah, that so much in that. That's great. And I think that learning culture, learning mindset is such a hallmark of a resilient organization, because despite we all try our best, various teams you work on making decisions and everything else, and you're value driven, we will make mistakes, we'll make the wrong call based on what we know. But the key thing is that how do we learn, how do we reflect? And it's great that you've got this process of reflecting and learning and adapting and modifying, not only as an organization but yourself. It's been great speaking to you, Tracy, and clearly your values are embedded in what you've been talking about, in what you're saying, how you go about it. But there's some real process in that as well that tries to get the best out of the people in your organization. That's brilliant. If people want to connect with you, get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
At LinkedIn, probably.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes. That's great. Well, really, again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate that.
No, thank you so much. And you're right, it was enjoyable.